Hey guys, welcome back to The Curly Reader. My name's Amanda, and today I want to share with you all of the books that I read in the month of September. All right, so during the month of September, I participated in a number of different things, and because of that, I read a lot of books. So, sorry, I'm looking down at my journal. So, in the month of September, I read 14 books. Of those 14 books, I had 2 5-star reads, 7 4-star reads, 4 3-star reads, and 1 2-star read. So, not bad, not great, pretty average. Of those books, 9 of them were audiobooks, 6 of them were physical books. You may think, 9 plus 6, that doesn't equal 14. You're right, it doesn't. One of the books I read both physically and audio the entire way through, and so I counted it for both. Also, of those 14 books, 6 of them I owned, 8 of them I borrowed from various sources. 6 of them were middle grade, 5 of them were young adult. That's way more young adult than I normally read. And 3 of them were adult, and then I had 4 graphic novels that I read throughout the month. So that's kind of the stats and the way that it all broke down. All right, so I think I'm going to kind of organize these in kind of how I read them. So I had a couple of read-alongs that I participated in. I had a couple of readathons that I participated in. So I think I'm going to cover those books first. Most of the books that I read had something to do with one of those things. So let's start with the first book that I finished, which is one of my 5-star reads, and it was part of a read-along that I was hosting, and that is The Only Plane in the Sky by Garrett M. Graff. I do own a copy of this book. It is MIA currently, so my daughter cleaned a room that it was in, and I have no idea where it went. And I keep forgetting to ask her where it went. So, such is life. Anyway, I digress. This is a book that I hosted a read-along for in the first, just about 2 weeks of September. We did a live show on September 11th. It is linked down below in the description, so if you would like to go back and watch that now, you can. For a few weeks afterwards, it was not loaded. I don't know what was going on with the streaming service, but it wasn't up for the first couple of weeks after the actual live, but it is there now. So it is linked down below if you are interested in that discussion. But the book is about September 11th. It is an oral history of September 11th. It is told from multiple points of view. Various people that were involved throughout the entire day of September 11th. It actually starts the evening before the book does and goes throughout the entire process. There is the audio from the actual planes and some of the air traffic controllers. It was very difficult to read. There were certain chapters of this that I had to pause and just take a couple deep breaths because it was very hard to read. However, it was phenomenal. It was so well done and gave me such a different perspective of that day. One of the things that I think this book did really well was explaining what was going on Air Force One during that time. It follows the pilot of Air Force One, the Secret Service that was with the president during that day, his aide has some commentary in there. And so just all those different perspectives of what was going on with the president. And I know there's a lot of misinformation and misconception about what was going on with him during that day. And so being able to hear that from people that were actually present and actually involved in that made a huge difference in the way that I perceived that day and how it was handled from a government standpoint. It also dealt with, like I said, what was going on in New York and the Pentagon and in Pennsylvania and all of that. And it was just so good. It was so good. The audio was phenomenal. It is a full cast. They had a huge cast of characters and then they would kind of rotate through who they were narrating. It was just so well done. There's pictures in the book. The way that the book was transcribed and written was so well done. 5 stars, all the stars. Definitely was very just life-changing in the way that I perceived September 11th. So that was the first book. All right, and then after I finished The Only Plane in the Sky, I started with my Bookoplathon rolls. So I documented this on Instagram in my Insta stories. And so if you're following me there, you got to see kind of as I was rolling and what I was picking as I was going. But I did make 7 different rolls and pick 7 different books that I read as part of Bookoplathon. I'm sorry if you can hear my son. He's playing in the other room, but he's kind of clunking around a little bit. So the first roll, I rolled a chance. I landed on chance, and for what I did for the chance cards was I randomized my NetGalley TBR and picked a book off of there, and so I ended up picking Kingdom of Secrets. This is a debut novel by Christine Morel. It's a middle grade fantasy book, and I really enjoyed it. I ended up giving it 3 stars. It follows 2 girls. They live in, like I said, in this kind of fantasy world, and one of the girls, Prismina, her father is a balloonist. He makes hot air balloons and flies them, and that's what he does. And the girl, is approached by another girl, who I cannot remember what her name is now off the top of my head. But she's approached by her, and basically the other girl wants her to smuggle something into one of the baskets on the hot air balloon to get it to, like, because hot air balloons is how they do a lot of their trade and commerce and stuff. And so basically she agrees to do this. She gets caught. Her father gets in a lot of trouble. And then she teams up with the other girl to try to right the wrong and get her father out of prison and kind of figure out what's going on with this smuggled item. And it's this whole story about this kingdom and misconceptions about what's happening with the king and queen. And it was really fun. It was really good. I really enjoyed it. I am very grateful for Christine for offering this book to me. This was an advanced reader's copy, and I will put on the screen right here when it comes out. It may have already come out, but I ended up giving that one 3 stars. It was a fun middle grade. So after that, I rolled again, and I landed on history, which is read a book that has to do with something in history. So I ended up picking up Run, book 1. This is by John Lewis, Andrew Aiden, Elle Fury, and Nate Powell. This is the sequel series to their graphic novel series March, and this was written before John Lewis, like the words and everything were done before John Lewis passed away. And so I ended up reading this. This has to do with after the march, after the civil rights movement, after all of that, then what does it mean to go from being an activist to actually making the change and running for Congress and running for government officials and kind of getting people in place that can make the changes that you want to see made. And so that's what this has to do with. It was really, really good. I gave this one 4 stars because it did get kind of dense with some of the like government political jargon and some of the like deep history details that just kind of lost me. But it was really good. It follows John Lewis and his life after the civil rights movement was signed into law and just kind of what his life looked like after that, participating in the was it the SLCC? I think it was what it was that he was in. But anyway, I really enjoyed it. It was a good graphic novel. So that one got 4 stars. After that, I rolled again and I landed on Steal a Book. And this is to take a book off of somebody else's TBR and read it. So I kind of cheated with this one because I read a book that was technically on my TBR, but it was also on many other people's TBR. And so I ended up reading Scarlet by Marissa Meyer. This was actually a book that I also read as part of the Lunar Along, which is hosted by Bookara and A Star Reads. They're reading through the entire Lunar Chronicles. And so we read Scarlet in September. This is a sci-fi YA series that are fairy tale retellings, and so this one specifically is a retelling of Red Riding Hood, and it just kind of picks up where the last one left off, and so I can't really say a whole lot about it other than it's a retelling of Red Riding Hood. The series as a whole is sci-fi, and it has to do with like a pandemic, and there is a population that lives on the moon called the Lunars, and they're kind of trying to wage war against the Earthens, and that's kind of what it's about. So gave that one 4 stars. I really, really liked it. It's not my favorite of the series, but the series as a whole I love, and I love Marissa Meyer's writing. So I read that. Okay, And then I rolled again and I landed on disability or mental health rep. And so I ended up picking up a book off of my physical TBR that I picked up from a thrift store, and that is So Be It by Sarah Weeks. This is another middle grade. It is about a girl whose mother is severely mentally disabled. And so her neighbor, who is agoraphobic, actually takes care of her and her mom and helps them out. And so the girl ends up kind of being curious as to where she came from. Her mom has a very, very limited vocabulary, but she always says this word and she doesn't know what it means. And so they kind of get some clues as to where her mom may have come from, where, you know, who her father is, that sort of thing. And so she kind of goes on this adventure to find out who, like, where she came from and what this word that her mom always says, what it means. This actually gave me Walk Two Moons vibes. It's not about the same thing at all. It just has a very similar vibe to it. I really, really liked it. I can't speak to the representation in it because I don't have agoraphobia. I don't have a mother who is mentally handicapped. I don't have the same, you know, I'm not dealing with the same things that the people in this book are dealing with, but I really enjoyed the story. It definitely made me teary, and I really liked it, so I gave it 4 stars. And then after that, I ended up picking up the sequel to So Be It. This wasn't part of Bookoplathon, but I just felt the desire to listen to the sequel. And I don't know if it's technically a sequel or a companion, but it's listed that way on Goodreads. And so I just picked it up, and it's called Soof. And this follows one of the characters in So Be It's daughter. And it was fine. I ended up giving it 2 stars because I just felt like the book wasn't necessary. I felt like So Be It was much better. It had a much more well thought out plot and all of that, character development, all of that. Whereas Soof, I just felt like there wasn't a lot of substance to it, and so I gave it 2 stars, but it was fine. But I knocked that one out too. Anyway, after that, I rolled again and I landed on Big Book, and this is to read a book over 500 pages. And so for this, I decided to listen to Supernova by Marissa Meyer. This is a book that has been on my TBR for a while. It is the last book in the Renegades trilogy by Marissa Meyer. I'd listened to the other 2 back probably closer to when they came out a few years ago, and I just never got around to listening to Supernova. And so I listened to that and I loved it. It was so good. I'm so glad I listened to it. This is like a superhero fantasy book, and it follows Nova, and she is one of the like enemies, villains of this world. She's part of their group, and she decides to infiltrate the heroes, which are the renegades. And she like goes undercover and becomes a renegade and is trying to infiltrate them. And you know that all going into the first book. And that's kind of, and then the story transpires from there, but this was the conclusion to that. I loved it. The epilogue had my jaw on the floor. I was like, wait, what? It was so good. I really, really, really liked it. One of the things that I have realized that I enjoy about Marissa Meyer's writing, specifically her fantasy, I tried her contemporary, was not a fan. But with her fantasy books, she does such a good job at character development, especially within her series. She has that time to really develop her characters and grow her characters, and she does that so well. It is a very plot-driven, action-heavy book, but the growth within the characters throughout the story arc is so well done. She definitely has a talent for that, and so for someone who doesn't typically read a lot of YA, I really, really enjoy Marissa Meyer's fantasy books. So that's the book that I finished for Big Book, and I finished a trilogy, so that was good. All right, and then I rolled again, and I landed on Humans, which is basically just to read a book about humans. And so for that, I ended up reading, where did it go? My Grandmother Asked Me to Tell You She's Sorry by Frederick Bachman. This also filled the prompt for Chantel at An Intentional Life's Read Your Bookshelf Challenge, because this is a translated work, and that was the prompt for last month. And so I picked this up. It's been sitting on my TBR for a while, and I just haven't ever gotten to it. And so, yeah, this one's different. I really like Frederick Bachman's writing. He definitely has some like good one-liners for sure. this one was a little out there. By the end, like, I cried. I loved it. However, I almost DNF'd it a couple of times because I just wasn't understanding where it was going. This is about a little girl. What's her name? Elsa. She's 7 years old. She's just a little different. And so she doesn't get along well with like peers and things like that. But her grandmother is sick and is, preparing to pass away, and she gives her a letter and says, basically, you need to deliver this to somebody and tell them I'm sorry. And so she goes and she has to deliver this set of letters to different people. But what her grandmother did was, because she had a hard time getting along with others, she created this fantasy world that Elsa kind of had in her head. And her grandmother really developed that with her. And so throughout the book, she's meeting the characters throughout that fantasy world. And it's a little out there, but it's also good. So I don't know. This one was weird. I gave it 3 stars because, like I said, I almost DNF'd it multiple times. And so it's hard for me to like rate something like that really high. But by the end, I ended up loving it. And like I said, I love Frederick Bachman's writing. So now I think the only one I have left to read by him is, well, I have a couple. But I have Britt Marie Was Here, and then The Deal of a Lifetime, The Way Home Gets Longer and Longer, and there's like Letters for My Son or something like that. So I'm getting there. But this one knocked that off. And yeah, I enjoyed it. It was just different. So I would love to hear your opinions about that one if you've read it. All right. And then my last roll for Bookoplathon, I landed on Who, which was to read a book that was like under the radar that you hadn't really heard anybody talk about. And so for this one, I did pick up Sister to Sister by Olivia Hayfield, which is around here somewhere. I did not finish it though. I actually didn't get very far in it at all. We'll see. We might try to finish it this month, but I did start that. So that's what I rolled for Bookoplathon. And then I also participated in Series September. And so there was a bingo board for Series September. And so one of the books that I read for that was Sky Without Stars by Jessica Brody and Joanne Rendell. Sorry, I keep looking down. My notes are down here. This is a sci-fi Les Mis retelling. So it's kind of pitched as Lunar Chronicles meets Les Mis, and I just finished reading Les Mis. And so I just picked this one up. It was so much fun, especially coming right on the heels of Les Mis. I was definitely comparing the books a ton. I'm like, oh, that's this person, and that's this, and this was a nod to this in the book, and going on and on. But I really enjoyed it. I would like to continue them. They are very long, so we'll see. The audio was fantastic. Really, really enjoyed it. Gave it 4 stars. But that was the book that I read to fill the Start a Series prompt for Series September. The next prompt for Series September was to read 2 books in the same series. And for that, I read So Be It and Soof, both out of the same series. I then read for the newest series purchase, I ended up reading the New Witches of Brooklyn book, What the Hex. This is by Sophie Escobasse, and this follows a little girl, Effie, who lives with her 2 very eccentric aunts in Brooklyn. The first book kind of follows her as she just moves in with them. Her mother's recently passed away, and she discovers she's a witch. And so this is just kind of going a step further with that. And this one, I didn't love the plot as much in this one. Like last year, The First Witches of Brooklyn was my favorite graphic novel I read the whole year. This one, I gave 3 stars because the plot to me was a little all over the place. I didn't love it. But I think there were definitely some good life lessons in here, specifically on how to treat new people when they come into town, because like every one of her best friends, a new girl moves into her building and she befriends her like over Christmas vacation, and then at school she's hanging out with her a ton, and Effie becomes very, very jealous. And so how do you handle that, and also how to like respect friends and bring them into the fold and that whole thing. I really enjoyed that as well. So it was still really good, just not my favorite. I gave that one 3 stars. All right, and then for read a series longer than 5 books, a book in a series, that is longer than 5 books. For that, I ended up picking up Christy and the Snobs by Chan Chow. This is the adaptation, the graphic novel adaptation of the next Babysitter's Club book. And so I love that they are going through different artists for these. I think that's fantastic. And I really, really liked this artist that did this one. This just is the adaptation of Christy and the Snobs. It has to do with Christy. She has moved into this kind of ritzier neighborhood, and she's learning kind of how to deal with ritzier neighbors and how they treat her and how she treats them. I will say, I haven't read the like source material for this, and we're not going to say how many years. But in this adaptation, Christy was not nice. Like, I'm like, you're the one being the snob, not them. So, you know, whatever. Still gave it 4 stars, I think. Yeah, I gave it 4 stars. But it was a fun adaptation, and I really, really like these. And so I'm glad that I did that. All right, the next prompt was to finish a series. And so for this one, I did Supernova and finished the Renegade series. There was a prompt to read a second book in the series, and I read Scarlet for that. Even though it's a reread, I still counted it. To read a book in a duology, I ended up reading Show Me a Sign by Anne Claire Lazat. This is the first book in a duology right now by Anne Claire Lazat, and it follows a deaf community on Martha's Vineyard at like back right after the Revolutionary War. There was most of Martha's Vineyard was populated by, there was a large deaf community there, let's put it that way. And then a scientist comes in and is curious as to why there are so many deaf people there and wants to research them, and it just kind of has to do with this girl and the scientists and what goes on there. This one for me kind of fell flat. I didn't love it. I enjoyed the parts that were on Martha's Vineyard, but not the, like, there was a part where she leaves the island, and I didn't like that part. I just felt like it was too contrived. And I wanted more about the deaf culture and stuff like that. The character development wasn't great. So I don't know. I'm still interested in reading the next book. But this one I ended up just giving 3 stars to. All right. And then as far as series September goes, the next prompt was to read your most recently started series. I think that this was the only prompt that I didn't actually get to, because my most recently started series would have been either Wife After Wife or Skyward. I would have read the next book. And so if I would have read Sister to Sister, that would have counted. Or I would have really liked to have read Starsight, which is the next book in the Starward series, but I didn't get to it. So I did not get that prompt filled. And then the last prompt was a series started more than a year ago. And for that, I ended up reading Undercover Bromance. This is by Lyssa Kay Adams, and this is a romance book. It is the second book in the Undercover Bromance series. I read Undercover Bromance over a year ago and really, really enjoyed it. So I decided to read this one too. This one I enjoyed, but not as much as the Bromance Book Club. Sorry, I think I missaid that. But Undercover Bromance is the second book in the Bromance Book Club series. I read the Bromance Book Club last year, the year before, something like that. Anyway, this is this next book, and it follows 2 people. One of the guy is part of the Bromance Book Club, which is a group of guys that reads romance novels to try to figure out their relationships and such. And this is a hate to love romance. It was really good. The only thing I will say about this is there was definitely a like social issue that. What's up, dude?
Yeah. I ate it all.
You ate it all? Okay, are you going to be quiet so I can film? Thank you. There's definitely a social issue that they were really trying to push an agenda on, which I was fine with the message they were pushing. 100%, 10% agree with it. It just came on very, very strong. And I wish there was more story outside of that. But I really still enjoyed it, and I gave it 4 stars. There is a lot of language. A lot of language in this book. And so if that's not your thing, stay away from this one. All right. that was the last prompt for series September. So I filled most of the prompts for that. And then the only other book that I read this past month that I haven't mentioned yet is The Day the World Changed Forever by Baptiste Bouthier? I don't know. It's a French author. This is one that I got off of NetGalley. It is a graphic novel, and it is about September 11th. It follows a French student during September 11th, and kind of how September 11th was perceived from a global perspective and how it affected the global climate as a whole. And I really appreciated that because being in America, we hear the American perspective of it all the time because it affected us most like directly, but it also affected the global climate, and a lot of decisions that were made by our government affected European countries and Asian countries and African countries. Like, it affected the whole world. And so I really, really enjoyed being able to see that kind of domino effect and how things kind of transpired. However, this book, the timeline was all over the place. You'd be like going here, and then the towers would collapse, and then you would keep going, and then you would like go back, and the towers would still be up. And it was just kind of all over the place. The timeline was, it didn't really make a lot of sense. And so it was kind of jolting to read. But other than that, it was really, really, really well done. Once again, this was a NetGalley thing that I was able to read, and so I don't know. I will try to link it down below. So, all right, those are the 14 books that I read this month. This was a long one, guys. I'm sorry. I got really rambly in a couple of areas, and with all the different things I wanted to try to include, it just gets away from me sometimes. So I apologize for that, but I appreciate you sticking around and listening to what I had to say about the books that I read, and let me know your favorite book that you read this past month. And yeah, other than that, I hope that you enjoyed this, and I hope that you stick around and subscribe. And until next time, see ya!